All right, so thanks for joining me. Welcome to everybody who's with us, joining from afar. Thanks to Jeremy and Harley for joining me here. This is really awesome to have people on. I know it's really unfortunate circumstances. We really are here, and because we're all home because of the coronavirus pandemic, and all our shows are canceled, all the tours are canceled. So I did figure it was a good time to bring a lot of touring professionals together, and just kind of talk to people and share experiences and share expertise, and hopefully that's a good productive thing we can do while we're sitting here at home. So thanks guys for coming on. I don't really want to dwell too much on really the state of the industry right now or anything like that. Let's keep it positive and talk about good things, because we're inevitably going to get back to doing a lot more shows. So thanks to my panelists for coming on, Jeremy Lemos and Harley Zinker. How you doing today, guys? Everything well?
Yeah, all good, all good. Settling into the routine at home and, PMA.
Where do you live, Harley?
I am in Rico Park, Queens. That's Queens, New York. Give everybody an idea. It's about 10 minutes away from LaGuardia Airport.
Gotcha.
Oh, dear.
Well, it's convenient to get to the airport, when I got to fly someplace. So no complaints.
Harley, what is behind you? It looks like some kind of workbench or maybe like a tarantula cage or something. What's happening?
No, that's just a shelf in my little entranceway here. And I think this little thing is what you might be referring to. Is a friend of mine gave this to me a bunch of years ago, and it's broken. No, there it is. So it's kind of this long-legged, articulated cam thing that jumps all over the place and does nothing. And a friend of mine bought it for me and said it reminded her of me. So,
oh dear.
That's no, I took it as a compliment. So,
all right. So we got Queens in the house. Obviously, I'm in New York as well. It's kind of a crazy time in our city right now. But Jeremy, you're out in your home in Chicago right now.
I am. I'm at home in Chicago in my apartment in Logan Square.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually used to live just like a block away from where Jeremy lives now. And actually, Jeremy and I used to own a recording studio together called Semaphore. We can talk about that maybe a little later. But that's where we're all from. So everyone attending, can you just go to the chat box that's on the side of the screen and just let us know where you're from? I see Christian from Austria is already joining us. If you guys just type in where you're from, let me know. San Diego, that's awesome. Cynthia, thanks for coming. Detroit, LA, Philly. This is awesome, guys. Thank you for all coming on and joining. Keep the chat going throughout this conversation. That's fine. We do have a Q&A box, which should come up as well on your screen. We'll be taking questions a little bit later. So when we get to that point, just type the questions into that box over there, and we'll get going. Also, one more thing with Zoom, there is if you've never used Zoom before, there is a gallery view and some other kind of view up in your upper right-hand part of the screen. So experiment with that if you'd like to. All right, guys. So we decided to focus today on starting out in small clubs, because all three of us started out in really small clubs and worked our way up into doing bigger tours and bigger shows and everything. So let's talk about your first jobs. Jeremy, what was your first paid gig?
Well, this is the funny thing though. I grew up in the suburbs, and I was very unhappy in the very uptight western suburbs. And as soon as I got a driver's license, I drove into the big city to go see shows. And there was a magical place in the 90s called the Fireside Bowl. It was in a bad neighborhood. It was a terrible place, but it was an all ages show that had 9 shows a week. They had a show every night, 5 bands a night. Every band got a half hour, no sound checks, 2 shows on Fridays, 2 shows on Saturdays. And it was a factory. And I feel like people might not agree with me, but I feel like there wasn't a house, like a basement scene in Chicago. And this is pre-internet, mind you. So there was such a strong scene in Chicago because every band from the suburbs, every metal band, every punk band, anyone could get a show at the Fireside Bowl. You just sent a cassette in to this guy, and it was like, Punk Planet, and you just learned how to, anyone could have a show there, whether you were a local band or not. And it was, if you were into music, that's just where everything was happening. So I would hang out there as much as I could. And there was a guy doing sound there named Elliot Dix. And I would hang out with him because I just wanted to be involved in what was happening here. And I remember asking him if he, oh, do you take interns? And he's like, no, I don't do anything like that. But if you just want to come and hang out with me and watch, do a show, like watch me do a show, that's fine. So I just came and I shadowed him and I was watching him plug in cables. And this is a club that probably had, well, every night the input list was kick, snare, tom, and you put the bass on a long cable. So depending if the bass player was on stage right or stage left, you could move the mic over. And then there was a guitar on each side and then 1 or 2 vocal mics. And that was it. There was no advancing. There were no stage plots. You just got up and played. But I watched him do 2 shows. And then, of course, he called me and said, what are you doing next Tuesday? And I was like, what? So he's like, I want you to come in and do this show. And I think you got paid, oh my God, I think you got paid $35, $45 or something. I mean, how much was it, Scott? It was.
I think it was I think the first shift I did there, because I worked there too, and I think it was $50. I think it was
okay. Well, and then I think you got a little bonus if you did the Saturday show and you did 2 shows. I think you might have gotten like
80 or something like that.
25 more bucks or something. But the funny thing is my first show that I did, I took it like it was, main stage Coachella or something. This was like, I was so worried, so concerned about doing a good job. It was actually the Demo Dare show. So the guy that booked this venue, every year he would take the 5 worst demos that he had heard and he put them in a box. And then once a year he would put a show on with the 5 worst bands that he'd ever heard. And that was my first show, was the 5 worst bands that sent in cassettes to the Fireside Bowl. And no one was there except for like the poor girlfriends of the band. And the guy was in the back of the club just laughing his ass off because these bands were so bad. But of course, it was very memorable to me. But I met you, Scott, because we both showed up for the same shift at this place. And I remember showing up and like, oh, what are you doing here? I'm doing sound. Like, oh, I'm doing sound. And like, I guess I'd read the schedule wrong or something, but that's how we met, is because we both showed up for the same shift at this all ages bowling alley.
I don't think you read the schedule wrong. I think Elliot, who was scheduling everybody, just kind of made a mistake that day, which was.
Let's not blame him. This was a long time ago.
Well, in any case, Jeremy, you were very gracious that day and let me take the shift. I appreciate it still. So, thank you.
Well, it just shows how. And we were just talking before we came on that how I met Harley because he works with a friend of mine for another band, and I went to go visit him, and he was mixing the band, and just how it's so why on the last webinar that you had, like all these people, it's like, oh, I know you, I've met you, and all these people are like, I know you from that catering at that festival or whatever. It's so crazy what a small world it is sometimes.
Yeah, and it's that way more and more every year. I feel like every time I go out on tour now or something. I mean, I guess it is that way within the industry maybe, but you spend long enough in the industry, and a lot of people get into touring for a few years maybe or something, but what the people that work on it for a long time and really get involved in it, you tend to see them in catering at different festivals or different shows wherever, or visiting. You find your crew friends and they're doing a show in town, and you go to visit them and hang out, and you tend to run with the same people quite a bit. So,
but the circle continues to expand, the longer that we're in this, and there are definitely people that we only see once or twice a year in a dirty field in Belgium, or, a football stadium in San Diego or something like that.
Hey, Harley, what was your first paid sound gig?
All right, so bear with me, a little story here. I worked in rehearsal studios and recording studios, and I kind of had no interest in doing live sound. I was in a band. I got a job at the mailroom at EMI Records, where a couple of my bandmates worked, and that just allowed me to, have some money coming in, and the schedule was easy, and I was working in the mailroom, no brainer. But I got to walk around the whole company, and EMI Records was the parent company to a bunch of other labels. I got friendly with an A&R guy there whose name was Dave Ayers, signed a bunch of amazing bands.
I've met Dave before, yeah.
Dave's a longstanding figure. So he had just signed a band called Verbena, and they were going to go out on tour with the Jesus Lizard, who he happened to sign also to Capitol at the time. And he politely pulled me aside one day and said, "You can't keep working here." And I kind of played stupid and, "Oh, what do you mean?" And he's like, "You can't keep working in the mailroom, you need to do something." He knew I'd worked in recording studios a bit and had rehearsal studio experience and that I, was into it. So he said, "Do you want to go out on tour with a band? Can you get the time off?" And I could get the time off. That wasn't a problem. And he said, "Okay, before we send you out on tour, I just want to send you downtown to a club to hang out to see if you know anything. So he sent me to a club called Brownies on the Lower East Side, Avenue A, 10th and 11th. And I shadowed Kevin McMahon for 2 nights. I mixed a couple of bands myself. And at the end of that, Kevin said, "Can we add you to the substitute? Can we add you to the substitute engineer list?" And I said, "Sure, no problem, call me whenever." Subsequently went out on that Verbena Jesus Lizard tour. This was in 1997. The tour was about 2.5 weeks. I came home. The day I came home, my phone rang. "Hey, can you fill in tomorrow for a shift at Brownies?" Yeah,
Yep.
My whole attitude was just say yes to everything. So I went down to Brownies that day, and what was the show? Arab on Radar.
They were great, man. They were a really great band.
Yep. So I was stoked, that was the first band that I got to mix a paid shift at Brownies. So that was my first one, and that's what got my foot into the door at Brownies.
Yeah, and I was the Fireside Bowl and Brownies. They were very similar on the same kind of circuit. I think we were all kind of doing that circuit. Probably like a lot of the first tours we were doing, we're all kind of playing clubs that size. I remember the first time I came to New York City, went to Brownies. It was where the gigs were. Became friends with people that worked there and still hang. The first time I walked in Brownies, this lady Darlene was bartending. Harley, I know you know Darlene well, and still a dear friend. She's amazing. So, still see people from that time kicking around the clubs and everything. So, yeah, I think maybe there's a similar network of small clubs these days. I feel like I've kind of like lost track with some of it. Maybe it was just more manageable back then. There were only really maybe a club or two in every city that really had like 200-300 cap that was really kind of serving that circuit. But I know at least in New York, there's a ton of small clubs now, and I kind of feel like I've lost track of what's happening in the scene there. But I know that a lot of people are involved in that right now who will end up kind of moving into the larger touring of the future.
Absolutely.
But Scott, there's so much to talk about here. I mean, there's a huge shift post-internet. I mean, 1997 is when I was talking about when I moved to Chicago and I started working at the Fireside Bowl, and when Harley was doing that show. This is pre and post-internet. I think there's a huge difference in just how people meet and know each other. I mean, both of our stories are the total guys hanging out around, and just people were desperate for, can you do this? Like I've plugged in a microphone before. Like, I don't know what feedback is yet. Can you do this? You just go, yes. And then you just do it. And I think it's very different now for young people. And then I lost my train of thought on the second thing I wanted to talk about.
Pre and post internet.
Yeah, but then I also want to talk about in the last panel that you had, I thought it was very interesting. One of your panelists was talking about unionizing, and we all have to like not take a lower rate, and we all band together about we're worth this much or whatever. And I feel like that's very, very far from what we're talking about, because when I first started touring, I wasn't touring. It's just that I was making some records with my friend for, I think I was making $450 a week as a studio assistant, and then I would do overnight shifts at my studio. And then my friends would say, hey, we're doing a record release show and we're going to drive to New York and DC and play 2 shows. Do you want to come with? And I'd be like, oh man, I've never been to DC before. And I would just get in the van and sleep on the floor in the van. And I never thought about, I need PDs or where are we going to stay. It was just because I was, I was like 24 or something, but I just wanted to go to New York because I wasn't thinking about a job. I did that for years and years and years of just, it's like what I had to do. I don't want to sound like it's like religious or whatever, but I thought, I didn't want to chime in the last panel, but I thought it was strange that, I don't know the point I'm trying to make. If you were saying like, you can't say no and you always want to say yes to everything. And I feel like that's how a lot of the things happen, is you're just kind of there at the right time and you're just the one that ends up doing it. And then years later, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can do this for a living. It kind of happened by accident.
Yeah, and I think you do have to say yes to everything, and there has to be entry points into the industry, and that's what a lot of these early gigs are. Getting in a van and just saying yes to friends and being around people. I think it's a little more what we were discussing in the last panel about organization with the industry. I think there does need to be some more organization with the industry, and I think it's a whole separate conversation. But
absolutely,
I think once you've kind of made touring your primary source of income, there should be resources that you could rely upon and information that you should have to kind of guide you about what you should be making, or how to approach some quality of life things like insurance. And
that's very true. And I remember a few years ago there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that had a bunch of our friends in it.
Wait,
and I remember reading
that was me.
Harley, you were in it. That was Harley,
you.
yeah.
Okay. That was me. And I coincidentally recently, as in yesterday, got an email from Neil Shah, who is the author of the article. And we're going to be doing some follow-up things regarding that. So yeah, but as you were saying, Jeremy, that article at the time brought some light into the fact that you could have a relevant career, and it actually is a career, and we are professionals.
Yeah, and I've talked about this. My very good friend Brian Case, his son is in an amazing band, which I'll put a link up to later or whatever. But we were actually having this conversation about how when we were growing up, you had to go to college and have a degree or whatever, but no one I know does what their degree is. And he was actually talking about how his son wanted to, learn the roadie arts or whatever. Like, oh, he wants to be like Jeremy. He could learn sound or whatever. And I wanted to tell him like, that's a real career. I mean, if you learn video, if you learn sound, there's a big, well, not right now, but there's a big industry, and a lot of people are making a lot of dough, and they need help, and a lot of technical staff. I mean, I don't know, we're going to Vegas. There's thousands of people that work in Las Vegas that do what we do, and they all make good dough. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, and you don't necessarily have to go to Full Sail or whatever. A lot of it's like more apprenticeship based.
I think that definitely the apprenticeship and shadowing people and being at the right place at the right time was definitely, I feel it was a little bit bigger a couple of years ago, because now many schools and universities are offering live production courses, and a lot of people can go to school and try to, learn what we learned by being on the job and just by saying yes and showing up. So, I think things have shifted a little bit, but when people ask me, how do you get into this? And I simply tell them my story, that I was just in clubs and just kept showing up and doing the job, and, brought a good attitude and a love for music and technology.
That's key. I use this excuse all the time of when I'm on tour and there's a local sound guy that is treating my boss very badly or talking back to her or whatever, and you realize, like, guy, you can't talk to her like that. I know that she might not know the right frequency she means or whatever, but like the right attitude, I don't know. I just use this example all the time. So many of our friends that are nice, good people who work really hard, they might not be the best, but I would always rather hire a good person who's trying than the most pro person who's super expensive but is a jerk and is terrible on the bus and backtalks to the artist. And and I think every job is like that.
It's every industry, any job you get in any industry is, you can't just be mean to people, unless maybe like you're a cop or something, or you know, like
right.
I'm just joking, but you know, like, but attitude is everything, and yes, you're not going to get fired for like having the wrong EQ on your snare drum. Like you're going to get fired because you're treating someone poorly.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately it's a technical job, but a lot of it is partly a service job as well. Like you're providing a service to people out there working. There are some jobs in the industry that aren't necessarily service jobs, like working at shops and doing more, if you're like an acoustic genius and you're working for D&B speakers, like development and stuff. So there are other jobs, but in general, we're talking about with just being a live sound engineer and being out there. Just be nice to people. You're going to get hired back way more often than if you speak, you know, come in with a bad attitude and start like just being mean to people.
That was something that in my early years at Brownies, and I spent about 5 or 6 years at Brownies and various other clubs around New York. That was something that, you know, people would regularly say. Bands that were on tour would come through, and you know, I'd get complimented on, you know, you're easy to get on with, you know, we're having such a good time with you, as compared to the guy at such and such a club that kind of had the chip on his shoulder. And my attitude then, and it still is now. Now, granted, we all have our days. I understand that, you know.
Fair enough. Yeah,
we all have our days, but I didn't quite understand it, because to me it was a dream job, and it still is. You know, I get to listen to music, I get to use technology, I get equal parts left brain, equal parts right brain. I get to meet all sorts of amazingly talented people, from the most amazing creative musicians and other crew people, to, you know, the big brain geniuses that design a lot of the gear and equipment that we use every day. So it you know, a lot of it is attitude and interpersonal skills, and that becomes even more important when you find yourself in a van or on a bus. It's all about the interpersonal skills and having that positive attitude, and, you know.
Yeah, touring very much so. When you're living with other people, you know, you're, you know, if you're uptight, things can get weird, you know, if you're living on a bus with people for a month. So
Yep.
Our buddy Lance asks stories of being the artist front of house and experiences dealing with the house front of house. Have you guys had any like horror stories where you roll in and there's just so much tension or anger or something that the show almost doesn't happen?
I wouldn't say that. I do know that, I don't know if you ever heard, there was a series of festivals called All Tomorrow's Parties, which the bands that I work for seem to be the target band for that festival. And every year I used to go there and I loved it. I remember going there with Aaron Mullen. I think it was Thurston's one, and there was a whole stage of Detroit bands. It was Stooges and Wolf Eyes and Aaron Dillaway and whatever. I remember going to see, what was it? Flipper. And I was there with the other sound guy, and it was the English house sound guy was mixing Flipper, and they had the Nirvana bass player guesting, and they had that, and there was like a pitch shifter on the bass, and it was tons and tons of kick drum and like no guitar, and it was like, oh my God, it's the band Flipper, and you've obviously never heard this band. And the sound guy and I looked at each other like, this sounds terrible, we have to save this. So I remember running backstage, and we went and we found the Melvins backstage. We're like, do you have a sound person with you? And they were like, no. And they're like, okay, we're mixing your band. Like, don't worry. Because we just heard the house sound guy. I'm not saying this is a negative thing. I mean, they were there since 6 in the morning, and they were hanging the PA, and they were running all the cable, and they're exhausted, and they haven't eaten yet. And no, they've never heard Flipper before either. So they don't know. And I remember Aaron and I were running around to every band that day because there's some kind of travel thing, and everybody had trouble getting their crew in or something. We were just like, don't worry, we're going to mix you. And we ended up just mixing all the bands that day. And I think the year after that, they hired Aaron to come in and just be a consultant. And then Scott, they did that at the Touch and Go Festival. They hired a bunch of like hipster engineers to come in and be the liaison between the bands and then like the PA people. No offense, PA people, but like we were the ones that actually understood when, you know, who is the band? Some band brought an Ark, Man or Astroman. They brought a
Right.
Tesla
Yeah,
coil.
that's right.
There was a Tesla coil on stage. I remember they were walking on stage and they're like, "Hey, so at the end of the set, you want to turn all the amps off because when we hit the Tesla coil, it might blow up all the amps." I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Here we go, 3, 4." I was like, so I mean, and the band Wolf Eyes, who I loved, I ended up mixing them on a Sonic Youth tour because they were house sound guys that would just turn the PA off because the inputs were gong, saxophone, vocal, and like 2 DIs for electronics or whatever. And many times the house monitor guy would just turn the monitors off because they thought they were trying to wreck the PA on purpose or something.
I heard feedback. I'm just going to turn everything off.
Right. And I've never had a fight with a house guy, but I also just sometimes I feel like just they're coming into the show from a completely different headspace of someone like us who are trying to put on a show. I just think it's a totally different space.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, all 3 of us really work for artists. We're mostly hired by artists to do. I mean, I've definitely worked on PA companies before. I think Jeff Halpern was on the chat. He had a great company, Music First, that I worked for when I moved to New York. So we've all done both of those kinds of work. But in general, the 3 of us have been kind of being hired directly by artists to do touring and shows for the past number of years. So
yeah,
I mean, like you said, I think it's just a matter of, I mean, our biggest job is to interface between the artist and any other audio production crew. We have to make sure that we get what the artist needs on stage and in the house and kind of have just a general picture of what should happen. So any other positives you think about working for artists, or any pitfalls that you found working for artists as your main source of audio work?
I'd say the only pitfall is occasionally you work for an artist that thinks that you only work for them and you don't do anything else the rest of the year. Like when you have downtime, they they're in the artist mentality of like, oh, when you're not on tour, you're just not on tour. And that's the artist mentality. But when I'm not on tour with artist A, I want to be on tour with artist B and keeping myself busy and gainfully employed. So, not a pitfall, just a perspective thing basically is what that is,
Yeah. And I think there's like a lot of lifestyle stuff that you kind of have to think about with that, with like some kind of financial management stuff. And just the lack of having a full-time job with health insurance and stuff like that too. I think
yes.
it is important stuff to think about. So there are a little less protections, I think, than working full-time for a company that might have unemployment insurance.
No, absolutely. Being being an independent, being a freelancer, call us whatever you want. We are responsible for everything. So we are responsible for finding our next job.
Yeah.
We are responsible for handling our finances, and we need to exhibit some forethought because maybe that next gig isn't coming as quickly as we want it to. So, we all know that when we're in the thick of it, we're in the middle of a long tour, the money can be nice and it could be coming in, but you need to plan accordingly because there's going to be that downtime where the money isn't coming in. And then things like handling your investments, even, many companies provide a 401k, we need to look out for ourselves. Many companies provide insurance. We need to look out for ourselves in that regard. So you need to be well-versed in these things.
Absolutely. And I'm going to try to talk more with different people about this and post videos about this. Had one about some financial planning stuff with our friend Tim earlier this year. So that's on our blog. Definitely check that out at theproductionacademy.com/TPA. I think that's our blog address. But in any case,
watch that video with Scott and Tim. There's a lot of, I can't believe, in the back lounge of the bus, there have been so many tours and so many young guys that I've worked with. And I'm like, whoa, I have a I'm fostering a rabbit and he's going a little crazy in the background. So I'm like in the back lounge of the bus after the show and like, so how's your, you know, talking about your IRA or whatever. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh my God, man, the government gives you a leeway every year. You have to do that. Otherwise you can't be doing shows when you're 65 years old. You have to have some kind of thing.
Yeah. So if you guys do have questions about that sort of thing, you can find Tim's info on our website. But I want to go to one of the questions we have here from Christina, getting back to starting out and starting out in the small clubs and small tours. And she asks, how have you gotten connected or approached artists who you want to work with? And I think generally, we get most of our jobs just from meeting people from earlier jobs. You know, you do a tour, you meet people that also tour, and the other tour managers or band managers or artists hire you for the next tour. But when we were getting started, how did you kind of get hooked up with your very, very first tours, and what did those tours kind of look like? Jeremy, you want to go first?
Just ask. You wouldn't believe this just happened. I just did a bunch of shows with Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth. She has a new band, and I went to LA and I was helping her get a band together. And the guitar player, everyone else in the band is pretty like pro LA session person. And then there was a woman from a band called Talk Normal who we used to play with my band, who lived in New York, that knew Kim from New York, that opened some Sonic Youth shows. And she just wrote Kim and just said, hey, if you're ever looking to do anything and need a guitar player, I'm available. Guess what? 6 months later, Kim needed a guitar player and just wrote her an email and said, do you want to go out to LA for a month and be in my band? Ding. And that's happened to me before with other people. I mean, I don't know if you want to write like Pearl Jam or whatever and say, can I mix your band? But if you are starting out and we're talking about that level of small club and you want to work with somebody, just write them. You have no idea. I mean, nothing might come of it, but then Matt Hannigan on the chat here, he told me his dream job, like, oh my God, I want to tour with the Dirty Three. And I was like, okay, well, I met the drummer from this other session. You should write him an email. And then a few months later, oh, their sound guy backed out. Is your friend available? Like, yep. And then he went on tour with the Dirty Three. You just have to ask, and there's a little bit of luck involved, and everyone is not going to answer you and say yes, but just ask. If there's someone you want to work with, write them.
Yeah.
That's a great idea, just reaching out to people. Personally, working at Brownies, and then bands would inevitably be playing other venues or other clubs in New York, and it just gets back to just saying yes. It's like, hey, we're playing Mercury Lounge, can you come? We got a little bit of money. Yes, and one thing led to another in that regard, and just saying yes and having a good attitude, and making yourself open and available to people, and then just building relationships from there. That's where it all starts, that's where it all started for me personally. And I think the similar situation for both you guys as well.
All right. Well, Catherine asked, any tips on how to ask to shadow local sound engineers, message or approach them on the job? What do you think? I mean, I've encouraged people just to go up and talk to people at a show, maybe after a show, when they're not
during the show,
not during the show,
not during. Yes.
Maybe after the show when things are done, you can always like lead with a compliment. That's nice. But as say it sounded good. Can I talk to you about what you do and possibly working here or whatever, or interning or whatever? I think volunteering your time, if you've never done a show before, just volunteering your time can be good.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really trying to get started on the basics, obviously I have a lot of online education about how to learn that stuff. So you can check that out. But if you're
just show up at a local club. If you can get there in the afternoon, and you can catch somebody while they're not terribly busy. You obviously don't want to take anybody away from what they're doing, but if you're polite and show that you're willing to help and you want to learn, you may get lucky and somebody will say, sure, we do shows at such and such time, and if you show up, we can hang out and you could pick up on things from there. So just show up. That's my number one advice when people ask how to get into clubs and how to start. You know, just show up. But again, you know, having a good attitude is going to get you a really long way.
Sterling in the chat box is correct. I remember having an intern at my studio who showed up from audio school and was very fancy and knew every plugin and the Neve automation and blah, blah, blah. And then when I asked him, here's the input list for the drums, can you go plug those in? And he looked at both sides of the XLR, and I realized that he's never plugged in mics before.
Right.
And knowing how to wrap cable, I mean, it's a joke, but if you want to be an intern and get a start in a studio, well, you can start in the mailroom, or you know how to make really strong coffee, and you have to know how to empty the trash can, and you know how to wrap 1,000,000 cables at the end of the night with a bunch of drunk band people.
Yeah. Whenever I encounter somebody that you know, professes to have some knowledge and skill in the industry, I ask them two things, and the first thing is, tell me what pin 1 is. And if you don't know what pin 1 is, you know, and then I ask them to wrap a cable. And if I see an elbow come out, I immediately, no, you don't need an elbow to wrap a cable, you know. But if I see them doing over and under, then it's like, okay, you know, so, you know, two of the most vital things right there to make you useful to somebody else. So I could tell you to wrap a cable, and that allows me to go do something else, but you know how to wrap a cable, and I have trust in you. And, you know, hopefully you can learn more from there. So
we've all done shows at the Fillmore, right?
Oh, of course we have.
Of course, but before you could mix, you had to do monitors. Before you did monitors, you had to set the stage. Before you could set the stage, you had to push the cases out of the truck up that weird elevator or whatever. And I loved doing the Fillmore because it felt like us in the club scene. Before you actually knew what version of plugins or using that sidechain compressor, you actually had to know how to like flip cases and pack a truck.
Yep.
I think that's really, really important, where sometimes people come in at the top and they actually don't know how to wrap cables or know how to case amps up.
Yeah. Stage management 101 is something that is a course I'm actually putting together right now, guys. I think it's super important. If you want to go out and work in the job, you got to be able to manage the stage, manage where all the cables go, keep it organized and labeled, and get everything patched into the right spot. So I'll have more about that coming up soon. But yeah, that's critical. I think if you're really starting out at the beginning, that's the most important thing to know. If you can go in and be able to patch a stage, look at an input list, look at a stage plot, look at the sub snakes on stage, the stage boxes, and get everything patched correctly, you're going to be in. That's
absolutely.
That's the thing that skill set will absolutely be able to get your foot in the door.
Well, you need to have a fundamental understanding of signal flow and where it starts, you know. So from instrument to microphone to mic cable to sub box to split to console, but you really need to understand, you know, signal flow. And the best way to understand that is to stick mics in front of instruments and plug cables in, and, you know, figure out when you get the patch right. And if you get it wrong, you know, take a step back and figure out what you did wrong there, so that you have a fundamental understanding of everything that, you know, as a mixer, I know where it's all coming from, you know. I think that helps everybody. None of us work in a vacuum, you know, because if myself as a mixer, if somebody gets the patch wrong, that screws me up as a result, you know. If a backline person doesn't set a piece of equipment up properly or has a wrong setting, then everything down the chain. So, you know, we all work together in this regard, and that gets back to, you know, interpersonal skills and you know.
Do you ever do monitors, Harley?
I have done monitors. It's been many years, but yeah, I you know what I'm talking about here, Jeremy.
Do you know how many times I've worked with people that have gotten on the comm and be like, you have to turn down 250 in the singer's wedges? And be like, no, I don't. Like, he needs that. He's screaming right now. He loves it right now. I'm sorry that your perfect mix is being messed up by my screaming loud wedges. But you know what? We're going to get on the bus with that same band, and if they had a bad show, they're going to be bummed on the bus. That's what. And I feel like and some very, very professional people have told me to do that. And I think interesting where me doing monitors for so many years, I would never in 1,000 years tell the band, oh, you got to turn that down. Like, I know your amp is too loud. I have to work around it. If people on stage aren't having a good time, I think that goes along with the attitude thing. Like, no one wants the sound guy to be bossing them around, or like, we need to put up plexiglass shields in your amp, or you have to turn down a half of a thing on your Marshall. Like, people that bums
Right.
people out. If you can just deal with it, everyone is going to be so happy with you.
Yep, absolutely. You know, I mean, we all work together here. You know, I've definitely been in situations where stage sound is affecting what's happening at front of house. And you
Rock
know,
and roll. It's very
exactly,
loud.
exactly. You know, we all work together here. And
Yeah.
you know, if something, you know, I'll politely ask if something is causing a problem, but I'm not going to want you, and I don't expect anybody on stage to, you know, compromise what they're doing to, you know, to make my life a little better out front. You know, it's all about having a big enough bag of tricks to draw on that you could solve problems. You know, and it's also always about finding that middle ground between everybody. You know.
Yep.
So let's look at Danielle's question here. Danielle De Palma from Bowery. She asked, what is the biggest change in mixing approach from clubs to festivals and stadiums? And maybe I would want to expand on that a little bit and talk about working with a bigger audio crew. If you're at a festival or doing stadium tours, you have a huge amount of people that you have to work with. How does that change the job? Harley?
You know, from a personnel standpoint, you have to have, you know, you have to trust the people that you're working with, and have confidence that they're all doing the job to the best of their abilities, and that you're all on the same page. You know, that rhythm develops the longer that you work with people. A workflow develops. It's even more important in bigger venues where, you know, you're only connected via radio at best. You can't see people. But, you know, establishing a workflow and knowing that, you know, it can go unspoken that if the main guitar amp goes down, the guitar tech is going to switch over to the backup. Now, we already have the backup mic'd. It's all ready to go. So you can get on comm and tell me, but I know that you're going to do that. So the more you can do with the less communication, because you're intimate and familiar with how your coworkers do things, the better off the show is going to go. And the more time you could just spend mixing and not worrying about other things. You know, as far as sonically, obviously bigger venues, stage volume is less of an issue when you're in a large venue, particularly when you're outdoors. You're not fighting stage volume or having to deal with that. So you're getting more through the PA in that regard. But, you know, the first festival I did, La Route de Rock, a long time ago, somewhere in France, I was nervous. I'd only done clubs and indoor stuff. And I spoke to somebody who was way more experienced than myself, you know, and I expressed my concerns. And he said, look, you know how to mix, you know, so just mix. That's it. Make the changes as you see fit. Nothing changes in that regard. Gain structure is going to be gain structure, and EQ is EQ. So, you know, don't worry about the environment. Just listen and act accordingly that way.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of students of mine who have gone through my courses, and you know, talking about they ask how do you actually like learn a big console, like if you're running on the S6L or if you're running a Digico SD7 or whatever, like they're big formats, big surfaces, tons of buttons and knobs and stuff. But you know, the response always is, if you have the fundamentals, if you understand that the microphone comes in the console and hits the mic pre and then goes on into how the signal chain is connected, how inputs and outputs of consoles work. That's what they all do. I mean, all those consoles do the same thing. The approaches to mixing should be the same. Like you said, gain structure first, using subtractive EQ, not compressing too much if you have a mic that's live. So, you know, all these things are really just fundamentally the same. Obviously, running those big consoles takes a lot of skill and practice. But yeah, mixing, I think, is mixing.
Yeah,
I
that's
think in a lot of cases, going into a bigger show is so much easier. Doing a small club show when stage volume can be like 80% of my mix. You wouldn't believe some of the bands that I've done where it's just a vocal PA and some kick drum, and you listen and it sounds good and it mixes with your ears, not with your eyes. But a lot of times, big festivals, I feel like I can get away with murder because there's like 30 K1s aside and everything is perfectly aligned and it sounds like, oh my God, this sounds incredible. Like sometimes doing the big show is easier for me than doing the club show. And I know a lot of that is confidence. I mean, I can't imagine what I mean, well, I can't imagine like Root to Rock or the first time you do Coachella or something and there's no sound check and you're just like, oh my God, like there's people around me and management is standing next to me. What am I gonna do? But it is all the same. And a lot of times it's actually easier because you can actually just mix instead of worrying about all those other things that are happening in the club. And the same thing happens with production. Like if you're walking into a club and you're doing a smaller show, the answer is no. Like, can I have 2 dressing rooms? No. Can I have more people on the guest list? No. Can I park a second bus? No. But when you're doing huge shows, like I know the guy that production manages Jack White, and the answer is yes. You can have 12 dressing rooms. Can I bring in 14 buses and a helicopter? Yes, yes. Because when you're doing those huge shows, I mean, it's kind of just dough because it's all your dough at that point. So sometimes doing the bigger show, it's a lot easier to get the things done that you need than trying to squeeze that big show into that weird basement venue that you're doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like the last arena tour I did was last year with Khalid, and we were just bringing everything. We did 2 nights at Staples Center in LA. Like it's great, and because bringing the PA with us because everything is totally exactly the same every night. Had the same system engineer. It was really, really awesome, Matt, and he was tuning the PA the same every day in every room. He'd go in there and he'd make the PA sound good. It was just like walk up and mix the show. It was super easy, super easy. Definitely not that way if you're going from room to room with a different console every night and trying to get, an hour sound check to get your mix completely dialed in. So yeah, it does.
Back in the club days, I used to bring a phase meter with me, and the first thing I did is I would go through all the monitors and I would say like which drivers are out of phase. You wouldn't believe how many clubs would be like, this horn is wired out of phase. How long has this been here? And they're like, huh? And you're like, you've never listened to this? It sounds like hell. And a lot of times I would spend the first part of sound check soldering together the broken cables at the club.
I feel like that happens less and less these days.
That's good.
Just better. I think the speaker manufacturers are making their systems more kind of complete. A lot of speaker manufacturers will just give you the speaker and the amplifier with all the processing for it built in. Right. A lot of companies do that, so it's more consistent. You're not piecing together different speakers and parts and amplifiers from all over the place with a DBX drive rack or a third-party systems processor. They're more complete systems now in general, I feel like.
Absolutely. Manufacturers have packaged things together and taken a lot of variables out. Like you don't have to find the amp and the processor to use with those speakers. You can get a system that works together, as a homogeneous unit. The flip side of that is, there's a lot of used stuff on the market, and there is still a fair amount of cobbled together stuff, and like you, Jeremy, first thing I do when I walk into a venue, I pink it, go through components, and I can't tell you how many times the left side does not sound like the right side. And, I would point that out to a system tech, and sometimes they'd have an answer, sometimes they wouldn't. There's one venue that I can't remember the name. It was a converted movie theater that had an EV trap box system. And I go into the venue and I pink it, I go left to right, and I said, all right, left, there's no top end, right sounds normal. I get the house guy over, he concurs, yes. I said, all right, let's start going component by component and muting amps and, muting processor inputs. We run through everything, and slowly the story starts to come out Well, last night we had a really crazy show,
Uh-huh.
and 2 nights ago it sounded okay, and I was like, all right, just tell me what's going on now, just so if we're going to fix this problem, we have as much time and as much resources, because I still want the show to go on. You still want the show to go on. So,
Totally. I've had that exact same experience where you walk in and you just know they're hedging a little bit. It's like,
yeah,
level with me. Tell me what's up with the PA. Like, we're going to have to fix it or something. Or have to figure it out. The show's going to happen. So
yeah,
better to just be upfront and honest about it. But and I think this speaks to Ron's question in the Q&A there. I don't like, honestly, even now, I'm not great with smart. And he asks, if you go on your first big tour, do you have any good system knowledge and experience, like amps, electricity, speakers, smart? I guess I think he's asking about more just about system management in general. I think like I still don't run smart that well. I don't get it that well. On a big enough tour, I'm gonna have the system engineer will take care of that for me. But I think what the knowledge you really do need to know is like what Jeremy was saying. If you go in and you see a problem, just understanding like how the system chain works and having simple tools to check phase and just be able to run pink noise through things. All those things are just gonna, I think that's kind of the more the thing you need to know when you're kind of getting out on tour, more than like the really advanced systems analytics stuff.
absolutely. I mean, smart is a great tool. You could do a tremendous amount with it, but the first thing and the first tool that we all have are our ears. And something as simple as blowing pink noise, panning it left to right, and just listening and walking around the room is going to give you so much amazing insight into what is going on with the PA. Obviously, bigger tours where we have system techs and other people looking after it, then that becomes their responsibility. But in my club days when I wasn't carrying any production, rolling into a venue, some pink noise, a couple of familiar songs that I'm acquainted with, walking around, that's going to give me the baseline of what's happening with your PA, what's happening with your room. And if you have any problems, you have any questions or concerns, bring them up politely and see where you get from there. And if need be, then you dig in and you pull out the soldering iron.
I have had to do that before. I've had to like repair speakers that were bad in a small club because you go in and there's like 2 speakers and one of them doesn't work. It's like, I better fix this before the show goes on. You won't be able to hear the vocals,
Right.
It happens.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that for a second, just having your own songs? I feel like sometimes, I feel like most engineers might know this, but I know that bands are always like, why do you keep playing that same dumb song every day? And you're like, you don't know why I'm doing this? If anyone doesn't know what we're talking about, you have to pick a specific song because it will ruin the song for you. I've had to leave cafes because my sound check song came on in the cafe and I was like, I cannot hear this right now. But you pick a song or two that you know upside down and backwards, and you just put that, once you've tested the system, you know it's working, you play your song. And you should know that song so well that you should know, actually, this song sounds muddy. The PA sounds a little muddy. That sounds right. This song, there was one song that I used to use where the high end was a little bit harsh, and I would listen to the PA and I would EQ it to be just the correct part of harshness that song was supposed to be there. So as long as the constant for every PA in every room you're gonna do is this one song that you know so well, as long as that song sounds like your song, the PA is actually doing its job. Garbage in, garbage out, or whatever you want to call it for data. And I feel like some people don't do that. I don't know how you could check a PA without having your song and play it through there and know that your song sounds like your song is supposed to sound.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the best way to just kind of do it quickly. I mean, a lot of times we don't have enough time to really sit there and do full analytics of a room with smart or anything. So yeah, you can. I mean, I feel like I can tune up a room in 5 minutes with a song that I know really well. So
yeah,
Harley, what's been your song recently?
As some of my touring family and friends will know, I've had an affinity for Hella Good from No Doubt for the past 15 years or so. Yeah, exactly.
But there's no shame there, though. It's not about the song or if it's cool or not. It's just like man, that one bass solo in the middle is perfect for checking the subs. I just use that every time.
It's a tool. I'm not listening to it because I want to listen to it. It's not on my chill out playlist. It's a tool for me. I'm intimately familiar with how the song sounds. I know what I'm listening for. I know specific parts of the song, whether they're going to be bright, muddy, clear. And like you said, Scott, there are many times where we're at a festival or what have you, where, you have 5 minutes to tune the PA. I'm going to play that song and I'm going to make some educated, moves EQ wise, because I know what that song should sound like. So. Yep.
Because you've spent years and years listening to that song on headphones, on club PAs, through monitors, on festival PAs, you know what that song, as long as that song sounds like your song, yeah, you could do it instantly.
All right, Jeremy, what's your song? What have you been using?
Well, it's interesting. Somebody in the panel said that they got sacked because their tune wasn't their genre, and I feel bad about that. But I will admit, there's I'm going to pronounce it wrong. There is a song. It's a French guy that made a song that was sampled by, I'm not going to find it in time. That was sampled by everybody. And I would actually use the original version of this song back when that record was like $400 or whatever. And that's what I would tune the PA with. It has a drum breakdown that's amazing. Oh, and here's a better example. I lately have been tuning the PA with the Jurassic Park theme song. It is such a secret weapon because it obviously has every frequency. It sounds like $1,000,000. You can tell everything from it. And I've done more than one, like some early morning outdoor thing in a park, and you've got 5 minutes to check the PA, and there's a bunch of families on, eating picnics or whatever with strollers, and you can't go play some Nas song or something over the PA in the park. Right. But if you play the Jurassic Park theme song, union guys in New York will be like, what is this? Like, it's Jurassic Park. Like, no one around you will be like, you got to turn this off. You can't turn the PA on until 10 a.m. or whatever. If you're playing that song, everyone is like, wow, this song is awesome. So I end up using that song because it's kind of a secret. You can kind of sneak it in. And I've been able to check PAs under sound curfews because no one minds that I'm playing John Williams.
Right there.
That sounds good too.
I just picked up a tip right there.
That's a great sound tip.
Yeah. Just to show we never stop learning. We never stop sharing our tips and tricks and secrets with each other. And maybe in the afternoon and a venue that has a sound curfew, they're not going to want to hear my No Doubt song, but they might not complain if I'm playing the theme from Jurassic Park, And
it lifts everybody's spirits every day. You can see, union loaders, the catering guys are like, what? Like, it's pretty fun.
I think we're going to be hearing that a lot around concerts as soon as we all get started again. Jeremy, starting a trend here, buddy. I've been using a LCD sound system song just because the way James mixes his records, I feel like sounds like a live mix for whatever reason. It sounds that way to me. So I don't know. But yeah, it's good to just have something that you know really well. I know on that song there's like one specific part of like 114 hertz that's a little weird in the recording, so I know not to play with PAs too much when I'm kind of tweaking out the low end there. So yeah, it's good to just kind of have a reference point,
And that's all the song is. It's a reference point. Yeah.
Let's take a question from Jeff here. Are the small clubs getting priced out as bands need more money to travel, and social media keeps a lot of people at home? What do you think the difference is from when we got started? I think there's just a lot more competition right now with clubs. I think there are a lot more clubs than there used to be. I think a lot of bands are relying on their touring as their main source of income, even like small bands. So they are kind of looking for, I think, more substantial guarantees than maybe they used to. Do you guys have any perspective on this?
There's a lot more bands out there. There's only finite dollars that people have to go see bands. So things are more expensive these days. So obviously, you know, bands are going to want to see bigger guarantees so that they can, you know, get some gas money and go home at the end of the tour with some money as well. You know, but on the flip side of that, the whole social media thing is you can now spread the word so quickly and instantly that, you know, here's my whole touring schedule. Whereas when we all started in clubs, how did you find out that a band was playing at CB's? Well, I looked at the newspaper listing for that week and I planned accordingly a week out. Now, you know, weeks and months in advance where and when somebody's going to be playing.
Not now, but maybe.
Well, you know, but I'm, you know,
sorry,
being positive, you know what I'm saying. You know, something tied into this, but, you know, maybe a little off tangent is I see a lot of new bands that have big crews and, you know, I've got mixed feelings on that. You know, obviously you need a sound person, you need a tour manager, but, you know, do you need a backline person for everybody? And it's like, this is your first van tour or your second van tour, or, you know, I think there's a lot of this, you know, oh, we need people to be doing everything for us. So people, sometimes artists aren't as quite hands-on as they used to be when, you know, I was doing club days back, you know.
But it does seem like everything is way more professional than it used to be. I mean, even small clubs, you can see like, oh, there's a tour bus outside this club. Like, what? Like, why is there a tour bus at this level? I feel like a lot of things have been figured out. I mean, thousands of production managers have thousands of spreadsheet budgets to figure out exactly like how you can make money on the road, and you can find a way to make money on the road or save money if you have a bus. But sometimes it seems like things are more professional. And I think this just goes back to everything that's being posted and pre-internet. I mean, it's the same thing with cooking and music and fashion. Like, everyone knows everything now. It's not like you go to DC and there's like one tiny hub of music that you can only find there. And then you may pull, because you know this one tiny record label and you bought their 3 records, you can figure out this genre and bring it back to your own band. Everyone knows everything now. It's just so different. Yeah. And going back to the dough, I mean, Scott and I used to run a small recording studio, and we didn't get a lot of big recording budgets there, but there were definitely some records that had budgets. And every year that goes by, I mean, no one spends money on music or buying music anymore, and bands are making so much money on their guarantees. I mean, not all of them. You think like the big front bands at Coachella are making the lion's share of everything, and even the medium bands, a lot of them are playing for, what do they call it? Recognition, or they're playing for exposure. That's the word.
Right.
So I think a lot of the dough is going to those big font bands, and I think a lot of us are working for those middle and big font bands where there's a lot of money there for them.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, all the budgets for recordings have gone out the window. I mean, when we had our studio going, it was a viable business. I mean, we obviously didn't make a lot of money doing it or anything, but we ran it as a business, and it paid the rent, and it covered the expenses. And at a certain point, it was, I don't know, but it was
kind of sad. We ran a business for 10 years, and it broke even, and that was a successful studio in Chicago. It's such an insane business model.
Totally. I just mean that it was able to exist and you know, and make records. And when we actually went in and did a session, we could pay ourselves a little bit of money, whatever. But it was the very, very tail end of any of those studios of that size being able to maintain clients or anything.
But this could be a good thing to talk about. The reason why we built that studio is because I knew I worked at a studio, and a lot of people, if you weren't Steve Albini or John McIntyre, people weren't calling studios to work with a name. They were calling a studio, and they just wanted to go there. So I just knew for you and I, if we had a studio sitting there and it had a phone number, people would call it and we would get work. So we busted our ass making that studio, and I was able to do that for a living for all of those years, just because I was the one that answered the phone, and hardcore band from the suburb wanted to come in and make a 7-inch, and I worked with them that weekend. So it's kind of like making your own work. And I think that would be something that we could talk about with people here, like, how do I get my start in the industry? Like, it also goes back with making yourself useful, like knowing how to wrap cables. You have to just you have to find a way to make it work for you. You can't just show up and, all right, hi, I'm
we're losing you a little bit, Jeremy, there.
I remember that studio, we built it because, say what?
We were losing you a little bit there. You're kind of cut out.
But go ahead and pick up that train. I think I may have derailed this conversation, but
all good, brother, all good. Something that you both hit on for a moment there was, artists for a good many years at this point, there's no revenue coming in via selling records. Putting the record out there is in support of the tour, whereas I felt like it used to be the other way around now. So, artists are making their living, or trying to make their living by playing live shows. The record and merch sales are helping as well, but it's not, the industry's kind of flipped around in that regard. And, many people don't, really remember that heyday at this point of huge volume record sales and artists being able to make some money that way, and making a little bit of money from radio play and whatnot. So now, you have to be out there, and you have to provide something that entertains people and that they're willing to pay for, and hopefully they're willing to repeatedly pay for and come back and see and enjoy.
I think they will. I don't in any way think this temporary stoppage is going to destroy our industry. Yes, you can have virtual concerts. You can have all kinds of ways to connect online. There's nothing like getting in a room with people and seeing the music live. I know why we all are doing this, because it's fun and exciting, and people that go to concerts feel the same way. It's a great way to connect with people. And especially the more time we spend online interacting via Facebook or Instagram or whatever, just getting out and interacting with people live is more and more important. So I do think that the industry will come back and be robust. And I think the live music industry has been very good for the past few years. I think there are labor issues with us. And there are bad things about the industry. It is the music industry, after all. It's notoriously shady, and there are a lot of people who will take advantage of you no matter what. But hopefully, all getting better and better, and I think our industry will be fine ultimately.
Absolutely, absolutely. I in hindsight, we've all been doing a lot of thinking about what's going on right now, but I thought back to 2008 when, the world was in a somewhat dubious financial, situation. I had worked nonstop. I was constantly out there. So touring, people are going to want to see live bands. People are always going to go out and connect with other people and be entertained. So
they say during a recession that alcohol and entertainment are recession proof. Everybody likes going out to the bar and talking to girls, and everybody likes going to the movies and seeing a band play, whether they have a job or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there are certain parts of our industry that are going to be really hit hard. Maybe like smaller production companies who are not as quite as many corporate jobs coming in. I mean, there's a lot of stuff outside of our touring world that is affected in different ways. But yeah, I think the tours will be hopping. I know that the fall is already booked because every promoter in the world, I mean, if they cut a concert, if they cancel a concert, they're going to have to give refunds, and no one wants to do that. So they're just going to postpone so they cannot have to give people refunds, and the tickets will be honored later, which just means that all the concerts from this spring have been rebooked for this fall.
It's going to be so weird. It's going to be so weird.
But
I can't wait. I like the two of you. I can't wait. I look forward to it. I was chatting with somebody yesterday, similar conversation, and I also can't wait, obviously we're going to have a lot of benefit shows to help everybody out because we're a community. And I look forward to participating and contributing to that in, any way possible.
Yeah. Let's go back to some audio stuff quickly, if you guys don't mind. Going back
Love
to
audio.
going back to PA tuning, because this is something I get asked about all the time. Do you prefer 32 band graphic EQ or parametric for system tuning? This is from Connor. I haven't used a graphic EQ in ages myself. I don't know. It's been so long. I use parametric EQs for everything, including if I have to mix wedges or anything. How about
is that just the digital era where you can actually bend that EQ to be as surgical or as musical as you want? You don't actually need to work with the limited bands.
I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. Is if you have access to parametric EQ, that's really powerful and useful. Like 7-band parametric EQ, you should be able to get almost everything done with that. I mean, I think graphic EQs have a very specific use. Traditionally, they've been used for wedges in analog setups for ages and ages, and I think that's really what they were very useful for. But at this point, I know I find parametric EQs way more musical and
I mean, my workflow is with regard to how EQs and the tools that I use. When I'm carrying production, I always have a lake with me at this point, and the lake is what I do, my fine tuning with. You can dig in deeper, cleaner, and have less after effects because you can tighten notches and whatnot. If I'm in a situation where I'm picking up production locally, the 7-band parametric is the go-to, basically. Something that I can control the cue and I can really hone in frequency-wise where I need to be. Most digital desks have some type of parametric that you can drop in on your master or wherever. But that's a workflow thing as well. But like for me personally, it's the lake.
Somebody in the chat window earlier was saying, when do you know you're ready to go to the next level or something like that? And I just was thinking about this. The first show I did monitors for Sonic Youth, it was at Stubbs in Austin. And I remember that because I was a studio guy and I didn't know the frequency numbers, because I knew that I had to sound like I knew what I was talking about, because there's no 550 hertz.
You didn't have the app on your phone to tell you at the time?
No, this is a long time ago. But I remember I wrote down the parametric equalizer, the graphic equalizer frequencies on my hand in pen, so I could like ring out Tim's wedge and be like, I would like less 315 hertz, because I wanted to make sure that like I could trick people by knowing what I was talking about. I think that's a good example of, I don't think anybody is really ready. You just kind of have to jump in, and do you want to do this thing? Of course I do. And you do your homework and do as good of a job as you can. But yeah, it's been a while since I've had to remember the numbers on that EQ.
When are you ready? When you get asked. And if you get in over your head, I like learning my way out of things. That's how I I've grown personally and professionally. And, I've been asked to do some things where maybe it was beyond what I thought my skill set was, but somebody asked me, so somebody had some faith in me that they reached out to me. I didn't let my unsureness or insecurity stop me from doing it. And if I felt there were new things I needed to learn to do this job to the best of my ability, then somebody's doing it, and pick up some tips and tricks.
Yeah,
but don't lie. People are gonna find, if you lie your way through and you're some big wig or whatever, people are gonna know really quick that you are in over your head. So don't be honest with what you know, whatever, but just do as good of a job as you can with the knowledge you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And if this goes back to being nice to people, if I had somebody interning with me and they asked me a question, it's like, I don't know what that is. Can you explain that to me? and they were nice. I mean, that's way better than
Yep.
someone trying to fake it and then like then realizing later they didn't know what they were talking about and were just trying to, you know, they didn't know the terminology and they were just trying to talk the talk. So yeah, always just ask questions. Yeah, you know, if you establish a nice relationship with somebody when you get on a job, if you're nice when you meet someone, they're gonna be totally willing to answer your questions throughout the show, throughout your time working together. So one more thing, I know a lot of it is terminology. A lot of people just get scared of like not knowing what certain words mean or whatever. I mean, that is why I built the Essential Live Sound Training, my subscription course. So, you know, that if anybody is out there and wants to like really like hone up on all the terminology and the fundamentals and stuff, that's what that was designed for. So you can definitely check that out if you want. And like you said, Harley, there's so many places where you can find good online information these days. So tons of great resources out there that we definitely didn't have when we were starting out. It was all asking people on the job, and I think we probably all learned way more slowly than people are able to learn these days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know, definitely. You know, I think we've all been fortunate though that we've had people that have answered the questions for us, you know, and shared the knowledge, and you know, and we've all done the same as well. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Any other topics you guys want to talk about before we wrap up here?
Just keep it positive, everybody. You know,
Yeah.
just keep it positive.
Oh, I think Jeremy's
off to there for a second. You know,
I agree. Let's keep learning in this time that we're all home and communicating, collaborating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, here's the bunny. Uh-oh.
Go to the shelter. No. Did I lose a bunny? Oh, I got a bunny. A bunny took over my computer. What happened?
Is that the same bunny you've had for a couple of years, Jeremy?
No, this is we fostered this one because the shelters are overflowing and people can't come adopt them. And I think a really positive thing to do right now is you could get a little fuzzy friend, a little dog or a cat, and you could go foster them. This little guy might just be adopted this morning, but we were taking care of him. He's a little friendly guy. And it's a positive, really, it's a positive thing to do right now, to be alone in your house. Help a little puppy. Oh, Matt Hannigan wants to tell me that the two original bunnies we had, their names are Bunny Eno and Rabbit Fripp. If anyone likes late 70s, you know, drone music.
I love it, Jeremy. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Harley, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I just want to say, you know, this is a great opportunity to talk with the two of you guys. I don't see you often enough, and you know.
Hi, buddy.
Totally. I feel the same. It's great to be able to connect with people. At least we have this platform where we can chat and discuss things. So
yeah, absolutely.
Scott, thank you very much for doing this. I feel like it's very weird to be sequestered, and I love being at home with my wife and eating all this food and watching all this TV or whatever. But doing these videos and like chatting with people and just still thinking about, like, you know, our jobs haven't gone away. They've just been postponed a little bit. And it's been very nice to feel like I'm in a public place with you guys and talking about this stuff. It's been really great. So thank you very much for doing this. I really, really enjoy it.
Sure. It's totally my pleasure. It's been really helpful and positive for me just to connect with people and just see where everyone's at and talk about cool stuff we can do together. So thank you guys for coming. I am gonna try to have one of these every week, guys. So I already got next week set up. So just keep tuning in. I think I'll probably do them every Tuesday. So it'd be nice to have something consistent week to week to look forward to. I feel like so Tuesday early afternoon we'll be doing this one again next week, and then probably a few more weeks after that. We'll see how it goes. But as we're all kind of home, it's great to just talk to you guys and get your experience and your expertise and your insight on things. So thanks for joining. Thanks, Jeremy, Harley, and
thank you, man.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and anybody personally, find me on Instagram. You want to chat? You got a question? I'll be more than glad just to stay in touch. That's what it's all about.
You guys want to type in your Instagram handles on the chat there?
I will gladly do that. And
mine is at the production. Action Academy.
What is mine? That's a good. Let me look at my phone because I don't.
Harley, is that what it is?
No, it's Snarly Harley, but I need to spell it right. Okay, here we go.
There's
Also,
some kind of race car. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
oh no, I was gonna say I do have a lot of YouTube stuff too. Same handle. I have a ton of videos up on YouTube. If you guys are looking for anything to pass some time with, check out some audio, more technical videos there. But yeah, there we go, guys. Thank you all. Stay healthy.
Right.
Stay safe.
Stay safe, everybody. Stay positive.
And we'll be seeing you soon. All right.
PMA, everybody. Be good.
Bye.
Bye.